Well, hello, and it's great to see you today, Amber.
Nice to see you too.
So today we're changing things up a little bit. And if there's one thing
Yeah,
we love change around here.
I guess so.
So today I'm not bringing you a topic, you're bringing me a topic. And when I asked, what is it you wanted to cover today? You brought to me, you wanted to cover the topic of communication.
Well, actually, I told you that that would never be able to be covered in 20 minutes, but that it's something that seems to continually belabor us as humans in the professional world. So I think we should always probably be talking about it.
Yes, yes. And you know what? If we don't cover it in 20 minutes, I'm sure we'll communicate later.
I love how you say if we don't. I already am asserting I know we won't. But
So here's where I'd like to start the conversation, if that's okay with you.
sure.
Certainly in projects, but also in many of the other areas I work in life, I've seen, and I'm just going to go to one of the latest studies I showed that said, what's not working in this company? And the very first thing that they came up with was communication.
Mhm.
So for something that we've been at now for centuries as a species,
Yeah.
multiple languages, lots of specificity, what is it that we're missing in projects when it comes to communication that people still feel like they're missing something?
Hmm. Okay. Um, I'm going to wind that back to just in its simplest form. Communication is not verbal between humans primarily. So it's conventionally known and understood based on a lot of scientific research and data over certainly the last 50 years in business in the professional world, but certainly I think well understood just in general terms that communication, if there's 100% pie of communication, only 7% of that pie, so a very small slice, is verbal with words. Um, 93% of human communication lives in two other sectors, and that is the nonverbal, which means no verbing at all, no word sharing at all, and then the paraverbal, which is, how words are felt and expressed, and not necessarily the words themselves, but sort of this whole, what is the dance, the human dance of communication? 93% of it is not word related. So you put that in a business context, and most businesses, certainly most projects, are all about words. In fact, we make decisions based on words we've heard, words we've spoken, or words we've read. A lot of times in a project environment, you are given a stack of business case information, whether it's in a digital stack or whether it's in a physical stack of paper. Either way, it is just absolutely a deluge of words. And those words have meaning. But the meaning of those words, depending on who's writing them and or who's reading them, changes. Because human communication is in the eye of the beholder. Our understanding, our perception, our meaning, we place that on those words individually, autonomously. That is complex. And in the world of project management, you know, we understand that projects are derailed by communication. In fact, it's the number one issue in project failure. It's miscommunication, lack of communication, bad communication, too much communication. It's all of these things related to communication. And I think because of that, we talk a lot about communication, but we tend to focus on trying to build better tools or trying to think about clarity from our own perspective of what's clear to us. And that's where the problems begin, because clarity is subjective. What's clear to me is not clear to you. One sentence, the way I speak it, the way I write it, I interpret a certain way. You, same sentence, same words, you would read it and or believe something about it differently. That's normal. human. And because as professionals, we have worked, it seems like, tirelessly to eliminate humanity from the workplace, we have increased the complexity around communication. Because actually, what makes the difference in communication is how we feel. And of course, feeling is not well invited to the business rooms that we're in. A lot of the project meetings I'm in, it feels like we are avoiding how we all feel to try to accomplish work. Not well done, because miscommunication abounds in those moments. And it's very difficult work to do because it's delicate, because it has so much to do with meaning and feelings and relationships. And these are not black and white things. Boardrooms are not filled with black and white decision makers, people who are on one side of a coin and the other side of a coin. Boardrooms are filled with people who have beliefs, opinions, and feelings about what's being said before they walked into the room, while they're in the room, and when they're walking out of the room. All of those things can be affected and changed based on a lot of factors. And this complexity is why communication is so difficult. And it's also why it can't be solved in 20 minutes. And I will spend the rest of my life still talking about it, because I can't solve it in my lifetime either. But we need to talk about it, Martin.
Oh, I completely agree. We need to talk about it. And even if we don't get through it in 20 minutes, I think we can have some insights in those 20 minutes.
Oh, certainly. There are some things that can make a huge difference.
Yeah. So as you were talking about how we feel about things in the relationships, I love relationships when it comes to projects. And there's a cartoon, and I'm sure you've seen it at some point. And it's how does a project build a tire swing on a tree?
I have seen
And
it.
then what does it look like to the engineer? What does it look like to the designer? What does it look like to the person who ordered it? What does it look like to the person who's billing for it?
Right.
And it's because you're right. In each one of those, there's a communication subset already at play, some with perception, some with feelings. And how we relate to that seems to be the difficulty. How do we have an engineer and payroll match the designer? Because we know those things are going to come from different spaces. What have you found has worked for you in helping bridge some of those gaps?
Yeah. So the most powerful tool that I have used and continue to use, it's actually also a tool that I teach any chance I'm given. And that is to understand in the human species that there are essentially only 4 types of communicators. So not unlike a Myers-Briggs or some sort of personality analysis tool. There are, on average, we say 16 different human personalities. Of course, within them, there's a lot of abstractions and differences, but 16. 16 is a lot. Certainly, it's a lot to carry around. And when you meet someone, you wouldn't want to just go, oh, that's them, because there's a lot of subtleties there. Communication is actually simpler than that. And the irony is communication is so complex, and yet in this space, it's simple. There are 4 types of communication styles. Every single human on the planet fits into one of those 4, as well as the 3 others at the same time. And people, once you understand these 4 communication styles, it's easy to pick them up. It's easy, very, very easy, especially when you're meeting someone for the first time, to begin to go, oh, I see how they're communicating in that first sentence or 2. And that's giving me the idea that they are this type of communicator. This is a powerful thing, because once you understand just those 4, you then can navigate them better, and you can build strategy. And I think certainly as a project manager myself, but working with a lot of PMs, this is a tool that can build value pretty quickly. But it doesn't start with you assessing other people's communication styles. It starts with you assessing your own. So there are assessments you can take. I mean, I have my own assessment that I offer to students and participants when I'm teaching it. And essentially, it asks you a bunch of questions. And based on how you answer those questions, it gives you your most likely dominant style out of the 4. Now, that can change over time. When I took the first communication styles assessment that I took, over a decade ago, I definitely registered stronger in one of those areas than I do now. But this is because communication styles are adaptive. And a lot of professionals that I work with, already have adapted into other styles. Why? Because through trial and error, they have been unsuccessful. And in lack of success, if you're bright and you're looking for ways to improve, you, through those failures, begin to adapt. And in the adaptation, you realize, oh, I'm leaning a little more to this communication style. Why? Because it's more successful with this person. So that's what I do. So knowing these 4 styles is a huge help, because when you know who you are, it also gives the opportunity to go, okay, if this is the way I tend to communicate, and the person that I have to have a communication with next doesn't communicate the same way that I do, then automatically I know I'm up against it, which means I need to think very strategically about what words am I going to use? What countenance am I going to have? What tone am I going to use in my voice? What level of diction in the language? And also, overall, like, how am I going to approach this conversation based on knowing that they have a different style than I do? So this can be helpful, but there's complexity within it, because a lot of us just want to communicate and go home. And that's the problem. If you communicate and go home, when you go back the next day, that communication may not have landed the way you had hoped. And the work seems never ending. So what I have found powerful is having these 4 ahead in my mind, being aware of my predisposition, I would say, and then recognizing that there are techniques that I can employ. I write my communications differently. I plan them strategically. And 9 times out of 10, every time I've communicated, I still learn more how I can better communicate in the future. And I keep informing future communications with individuals based on what I've learned about how that worked, what their style is, and it's humbling. I think that's why we don't do it also. I don't think we think strategy, and I don't think we break it down in a professional environment, because quite honestly, it's just humbling. It's like getting schooled on yourself every single day. And it is. For me, it has been a very humbling experience. And as a professional, it can make you feel like your gifts and skills are lacking when in fact they're not. It's just miscommunication. So that's one thing I think that can be helpful. But overwhelmingly, that's not helpful if you don't carry with you the self-awareness to do the work. And in a lot of professional realms, I see a lot of individuals who think they're all that in a bag of chips, when in fact, they've got some blind spots. I certainly do. And those blind spots, the more they continue to be blind to that individual, the longer miscommunication goes on. Sorry about that. My telephone ringing. Even though I have it on Do Not Disturb, but I'll have everyone know that my Do Not Disturb, my children can break through that. Oh. And that's my child. They're both grown adults, but they still get me. So
that's all good.
I will call them back.
We'll edit that out. And by that, I mean,
we won't
edit anything.
We don't edit anything.
Because communication is just that. Even that ringing bell is a thing that gets into our space. Yeah. And we were literally just talking about blind spots.
Yes.
Because sometimes we do have, like you just said it best, which is there is a thing in your world called my children able to come and see. And that's a priori. It's top of the list.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's so top of the list that we forget that they're literally that top of the list.
Yeah.
What have you found, especially around blind spots? Because you and I exist to some degree to ask questions about our blind spots of each other. And certainly over the years, we've both said, hey, have you seen that little thing over there, for each other? But how can we improve our communication around what we don't see? The I don't know what I don't knows in our world.
Oh, it's a tough question.
You'll finish it in 20 minutes easy.
Well, I can only speak to my own experience. And honestly, I don't know any of this stuff at all if I don't know it from my own experience. So I'm not interested in anyone hearing my voice and thinking, whoa, that's so intimidating. Don't be intimidated by me. And I intimidate easily. So I think first and foremost, I've recognized that about myself. I walk into a room and oftentimes people just immediately feel something towards me that isn't attractional. It's actually kind of like, whoa, there's a lot going on there. My presence, And I think I often haven't even spoken a word yet. That's something that in my younger professional career, I wasn't aware of that. Now I'm more aware of that, and I realize it becomes a real impediment to me as a communicator. When I'm a keynote, for instance, you know, I was in a conference recently, and I was the closing keynote, and there's people in the room, they're like, oh, they don't even want to talk to me because I'm the closing keynote, which means what? It just means I'm the last person that's going to speak. But for the terminology and the professionalism around it in the business world, we use all these terms that create this elevation and this hierarchy when in fact, like, I'm just there to share. And I'm just a human. But a lot of that structure in professional spaces creates communication barriers. And we forget that it does. Case in point, like language use itself. I consistently try to remember, don't use big words, Amber. Just because you know them doesn't mean you should use them. Why? Because those big words potentially miscommunicate to people in the room that are too intimidated to mention that they don't know what you're talking about. I'll give you a perfect example of that. In one of my classrooms, I was teaching a group of individuals, and a whole posse of them had come from the Department of National Defense. And they still work in the Department of National Defense, and they were there to kind of skill up, right? And they, to themselves, were talking, yada, yada, lots of acronyms, lots of letters. Oh, yay, 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 yes, patting on backs, it's all wonderful. To which the people in the room that don't work at D&D are like, huh? What? What are you talking about? To which the D&D group, of course, has this camaraderie and also a little bit of like, oh, you don't know what we're talking about? To which it takes a bold individual in that environment to say, no, actually, I don't. Because they're saying, admittedly, I'm vulnerable in this conversation. And my vulnerability is because you guys are all buddy-buddy and you speak the same language. And I am an outsider and I don't. So I don't know. There are a lot of professionals who don't have the self-awareness to stake that claim boldly and also don't want to do the work of putting themselves in that vulnerable position to have these individuals explain, yeah, this is what the acronym stands for, which in plain language isn't that complex. But we make it more complex by using that kind of vernacular in professional settings. So for me, when I write something, when I speak, I try to just think about the fact that if there was a 12-year-old in this room, would they understand what I mean? That's not because I am presuming that everyone only is at a 12-year-old comprehension level. That's not it at all. It is that if there are any individuals in the room that have any other barriers, could be that English isn't their first language, could be that I'm speaking too quickly, could be for a bunch of things. If I'm clearly, plainly communicating in language that is as simple to understand if you are 12 years old as if you are 21 years old, if you are 82 years old, that helps reduce the amount of miscommunications. And in professional settings, that's also a humble pie because a lot of us have spent a lot of time and done a lot of work, and we have earned the right to use language and to use terminology that makes people impressed by us.
I love where you're going with the vulnerability piece, and I especially want to just speak just for a quick second there, because in my brain I heard a distinction, which was the difference between I don't know that thing and I don't know what you're saying in this moment.
Mm.
And certainly when we bring age into this, my own children sometimes say things to me that are very common vernacular
Mm-hmm.
for that age group that are not common for me. Recently, I heard all about the tea, and I was like, "You wanted a drink?" Because that's how I knew tea.
Mm-hmm.
But in that space, it's about, and again, this is the specialty place that I think I just heard you say something about, which was laying the table so that people can ask and feel comfortable for
Mhm.
clarification.
Yeah.
My kids made it safe for me
To ask.
to say, "What is tea? I don't understand." And then I used tea in a sentence and was like trying to be proud. And then I used it twice, and they're like, "You're using
Stop.
too much tea.
Stop.
Stop making fetch happen. It's not going to happen.
I don't
But
even know what you're talking about. So
oh,
that's just how clueless I am about that vernacular.
all good, all good. Um, how do we lay that table so that people can ask for that clarity?
You know what, Martin? It's really hard when we work for organizations that constantly remind us that if we're vulnerable, we will be looked down on. And there are more organizations that create that feeling than not. And it is because they were built in times with structures that are not today. They are from yesteryear. They are literally, some of them born out of the 50s and the 60s, when, quite frankly, we had a world that functioned very differently than we have today. And those systems die really hard. And a lot of the time they die hard because we create and we reinforce hierarchies that enable and allow people from the 50s and 60s to still hold the authority.
Hmm.
And their impression of communication and the way the world works is that I speak, you do, you listen. When in fact, many of those individuals, and I'm not being critical of these people individually, but many of those individuals are speaking a language that is as foreign to this generation as another language is. We're all speaking English, but the way you're talking is so disconnected from the way the world exists today. And this is the challenge with that. It's not a cycle of learning, an opportunity to do better and to learn and to create healthy environments where people can communicate honestly. It's about, I'm better. I've been here longer. And you just need to do as you're told. And um, those cycles lock us. They lock us up and they eliminate opportunity to grow and change. And creating emotional safety in a workplace so that people can be vulnerable um, only happens if those individuals themselves that hold the authority are also aware that they can be vulnerable. So if you can't show your vulnerability as a key leader in a way that, allows people to see that they're safe to do it as well, people are only ever going to tell you what you want to hear. And those telling people what you believe they want to hear is lying. And in a project environment, it means that the truth um, is secondary to us pretending to be successful, which ultimately means the project doesn't succeed because it's not based on truth and fact. Or if it does succeed, it only has succeeded because we've lied our way around it and through it to produce whatever we've done at the end. And those types of projects, the complexity, the miscommunication, the drama, and the trauma that they create, we can ill afford to spend time doing that kind of work anymore because the work is really important. We're talking about, in a lot of cases, life or death. I work in biomedical device engineering a little bit, not personally because that's not my area of expertise, but supporting individuals to learn project management in that. They're working on things that are life and death. This is not a time for us to just be so incredibly protective of ourselves that we miscommunicate and spend money in ways that isn't wise and end up slowing down production. And I mean, that costs. It costs something graver than is worth it. So the authorities in the room have to be willing to be vulnerable themselves. They also have to recognize their own self-awareness. When you walk into a room, do people feel safe to share with you?
So, with a couple minutes left, maybe that's the perfect question to finish off with. How do we set up our own self awareness, or maybe what's a question you could ask yourself
Mm.
so that you would know whether those around you feel safe to share?
I mean, the simple question is to ask yourself, what's the last conversation you had with someone in a work environment? Just rethink it. What did you say? What did they say? How did it feel? A lot of times we don't ask ourselves how we feel, especially at work, because we're like, well, I feel at home, not here. Not true. We never cease to be human. So how did you feel? If you're the position of authority, did you feel that individual gave you the truth? Did you feel that you gave them opportunity to speak? Do you feel that there was information that was shared that both can use and benefit? Or did any of that not happen? And then ask yourself, what was your role in that? If the person didn't really say anything except just corroborate and or agree with you, why? Why did they do that? Did they do that because you were right? Or did they do that because there was no choice but for them to agree that you're right? This is a question I had to ask myself over and over and over again. Did I hear things in that conversation that made me uncomfortable? And if I did, what did I do with that discomfort? Did I push back and defend myself? If you did, then there's a really good chance that you didn't create space for someone else to share because you were too worried about your own ego being deflated. That's what I learned. I found myself, instead of asking questions, I found myself explaining away or giving justification for my actions. That immediately communicates that your ego is being bruised and you're not self-aware. So no, you can't create a safe space for someone to share the truth with you if you can only defend your decision. And the thing is in those moments too, we often think, but I have to defend the decision because the decision was right. Uh, Not necessarily the most important thing in that moment. Being right and wrong in those conversation moments is not the most important thing. The communication happening is the most important thing. The rightness and the wrongness will find its way. A wise person once said, time will take care of it. Time takes care of the right and the wrong. Why? Because if it was right, it shows itself. If it was wrong, it shows itself. You don't have to defend it in that moment. In that moment, what you need to do is have the ears to hear what's being said and share the vulnerability of how you're feeling in that moment. And asking yourself just what happened in the last conversation can be really telling. And I think, also you got to know the 4 communication styles. And that's really important. It's important to, and you can Google that if you want. You can come to me if you want. But knowing what those 4 are, which one is more predominant for you, and then also how the others relate to your style, incredibly powerful. It will change the game. It changed my game in communication. And I'm still struggling, but at least I have some things that I can look to that give me some help.
Well, I want to thank you. We started with communication and relationship.
Yeah.
And now we're ending with communication and relationship.
Yep.
And a look back at the last conversation and what was the conversation held. And I'd just like to invite all the listeners to come to our next conversation because, yeah, you're right. We didn't solve all communication in 20 minutes.
I didn't even tell you what the 4 communication styles are.
Maybe that could be another podcast.
I was going to say, stay tuned and we'll do it. Maybe we should do one on each of them.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much for today.
Thanks, Martin.
Bye-bye.